Welcome to the Wed Pro Podcast, the show for wedding professionals and business owners.
Each month, we bring you top industry experts, business chat, and hints and tips to grow your business.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Roxy.
Welcome to the Wed Pro Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 30 of the Wed Pro podcast. Today we are joined by an amazing business owner called Pran from The Wedding Lawyer, and today we're going to be talking about all things legal when it comes to your wedding business. And I've been really excited to get my teeth into this subject, so welcome.
Thank you very much, Roxy. Thank you very much for having me. And can I just say well done on all the podcasts. I've listened to all of them. They all sound extremely incredible. And
thanks.
Guests on. So I feel a bit nervous, but thank you very much nevertheless.
Honestly, no need to be nervous. Thank you so much for saying that. Have you been binging them like a Netflix binge?
I did, yeah. Yesterday I spent a good 2 hours going through various ones. They were all very interesting though. I think you're doing supporting the industry. So thank you very much.
That is what we're all about. And I'm actually very excited, because this is episode 30. A little bit of a benchmark going on right now.
Yeah. Congrats.
This podcast. So today we're going to be talking about, like I said, all things legal when it comes to wedding businesses. But first, tell me a little bit how you started, how you got into doing what you do now.
So I got married about 6 years ago. I did law, and when I was trying to organise my wedding events, I realised that actually I didn't fully understand my contract. We had various issues with certain suppliers, which were kind of legal issues, and I just had nowhere to turn. I Googled, wedding lawyers or lawyers that could help with the events industry, and I couldn't find very much out there. And I thought, well, I've already kind of done a law degree and was a practicing solicitor. And I thought, well, if there's some way to merge my passion for events and weddings, as well as my passion for the law, actually, it might be quite an interesting combination. So that's how it kind of came about. I must say, we started off going to wedding fairs, and everyone laughed at our stall because they thought all we did was like divorce law. They're like, well, what on earth are you doing at a wedding fair?
Yeah, why are you here?
Exactly. And actually, to be quite honest with you, for the first year and a half, no one really looked at our business, and it just wasn't really of interest to anyone. Mm-hmm. I'd say actually the pandemic has unfortunately changed the whole kind of landscape of the wedding industry, as I'm sure you're very much aware, but particularly the legals behind the wedding industry. I think more and more people are now thinking, yes, of course, weddings are so exciting, they're so fun, and there is a lot of kind of enjoyment involved in organizing a wedding, but actually there is actually a commercial arrangement that's also taking place, and the handover of quite a lot of money. So actually getting the legals right is now becoming more on people's minds than they were perhaps a few years ago when we first started off.
I think you're exactly right. And I was just going to ask the question, has it all changed since COVID? Even from not just wedding business perspective, from a couple's perspective as well, because they might have heard about other couples that maybe have been unfortunately things have not gone their way with suppliers, or businesses have had to close and things like that. And I think nowadays it's kind of opened our eyes, hasn't it? It's opened our eyes to things that potentially could go wrong. Not that they often do, but it is really important to have those contracts and things in place for that one time when things might not go right.
Yeah, I think you're right. What we've got to remember is the UK, I know a lot of your clients are from abroad as well, but if I just speak about the UK wedding industry for a moment, it's worth about £16 billion. And it's completely unregulated. That means you can have new businesses setting up shop tomorrow and start trading and serve the wedding, the lucrative wedding community that we have in this country. Now, the problem is that if you have a bride, they've saved their whole lives for their big day, putting money aside every month, they want to make sure that they're best protected. So actually, in terms of the work that we do, we work for both suppliers and couples, but I'd say 60 to 70% of our work is really helping suppliers at the moment, purely because that's where we feel the need is, just to make sure that people are as legally compliant with their obligations as they possibly can be.
And that's a very true and very scary fact, to think that this industry is so massive and with such a lot of money, but yet it's not regulated. Can you see that changing anytime soon, or like kind of moving forward with things?
It's tough, isn't it? Because there are pros of just allowing people to set up businesses and starting to trade. I mean, that's the beauty of the country that we live in. You know, you can start trading straight away, and I'm sure many of your followers on Facebook and listeners have done that. And actually, I think that's really welcome. And the reality is that the majority of suppliers are brilliant and amazing in the wedding industry. Unfortunately, there's only a very, very, very small minority of suppliers that let the entire industry down. Do I see it changing? I think there is certainly more focus. There are now kind of parliamentary groups for weddings and different pressure groups that set up during the pandemic, which are now carrying forward a lot of good work. Whether it changes anytime soon, I'm not sure. But I think the work that you're doing and the work that lots of other organizations are doing, I think is very welcome, because what you're doing is essentially providing signposts for this massive industry that doesn't have very much by way of signposts and regulations. So I think just the work that you alone and Katie are doing, I think is very much welcome, because you're giving a steer to new businesses.
Yeah, and that was exactly one of the reasons why we started in the beginning, was that the fact of wedding businesses, as we all know, we are all creative, so we may not know and be able to wear all of the hats that we need to run a successful business in all of the right ways. That is why we do what we do, and we don't profess to know everything about every subject. Social media is our thing, marketing, stuff like that. Everything else, we get people in just like you to come and advise, teach, because knowledge is power.
Correct.
Knowledge is power.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, on the 23rd of March in 2020, I'm sure every supplier watching or listening to this will remember where they were when the Prime Minister came on our TV screens and said that weddings are banned, because never in the history, well, certainly in my recollection and knowledge, has that ever happened. So, you know, it turned the whole industry upside down. And actually, if we can provide, and I'm sure you guys are as well, just some guidance to navigate, you know, life going forward now, because I don't think weddings will ever be as they were. I think there's always going to be some apprehension now when signing contracts. We know weddings insurers are not as readily giving insurance. So there is a lot of change, but I think the work that we're doing, and certainly the work that you're doing in providing your business kind of guidance, I think is going to be very welcomed going forward.
Great, and this kind of steers us nicely to what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to cover mainly like the 3 contracts that every wedding supplier should have. So let's jump straight in. Kind of what's
well, the first one's the most obvious. It's your terms and conditions, what you give to your couples if you're a supplier. I think all I would say is I'm not going to turn this into a massive law lecture, because that would be dead boring and everyone will switch to and I'm really conscious about that, because actually the law can be quite dull, and one of our key aims is to try and make it a bit more interesting and a bit more accessible. But what I would say is, just for your listeners, is if you have one contract for both couples and businesses, that's red flag number 1, because actually the laws are slightly different if you are doing corporate events to if you're doing consumer couple events. So I think that's kind of my golden nugget number 1. If you have one contract for business and consumers, maybe think about where you can take some advice to just amend that. I think that's certainly the first thing that I would love to just kind of make absolutely clear. And I think I'll just give 2 other very quick golden nuggets about your supplier terms, because I don't want to risk kind of boring you. But I think if you can make your contracts just clear and understandable, I know that sounds so obvious, but I've met so many suppliers that feel that they need to have all this legal jargon in their contracts because it sounds good, or it sounds like something they've copied from another contract. I think that is a potential problem. So if you as a supplier don't understand every term of your contract, that I think you need to do something about that. That's my personal view, because if you don't, the chances are your clients won't.
That is very true. And actually, I am a little bit guilty of, if I'm like buying something and I need to like sign a contracts, things like that, I find it very disinteresting to be reading all of the small print. And sometimes I think, who knows what I'm signing for here? But like I say, if it's clear, does it have to have like all of the formal legal words, or can you write it in a way that is more understandable for the end user?
Yeah, 100%. And actually the law actually says, the Consumer Rights Act, which is a key piece of legislation that actually governs the relationship between wedding suppliers and couples, says that actually your terms need to be as clear as possible and as fair and unambiguous. So, you know, you're completely correct. It's not only a nice to have contracts that are clear, but actually it's a legal requirement, really. So I think that's something I would ask your listeners to really just go, you know, almost read your contracts with fresh eyes, because a lot of people just get used to slapping a document in front of their couples and that's the end of it. Only final thing I would say is, you know, check how long your contracts are. I mean, I see contracts that are only a page long, and you might think that will be sufficient, but the chances are, if they're only a page and you're, you know, having money handed over of a few £1,000s, the chances are you're probably missing some really important clauses. That's not, contracts have to be really, really long, but the chances are, if it's very short, you're probably missing some really crucial clauses that could probably be put in there to better protect you as a business.
Yeah. And I was actually going to ask right at the beginning, but it slipped my mind. Let's bring it all back. What is a contract actually for? What is it there for? What's it for?
So a contract is there to govern the relationship. As I said at the start, yes, weddings are great. Your bridal hair or your catering or your venue, all great, all exciting. But the reality is, it's a commercial arrangement. It's you as a business offering your services, whatever they may be, and in return you may get a deposit back, or you may get your full payment back at a certain stage. So what the contract does is, it's a very clear document that sets out who does what, when do they do it, and what happens if things go wrong. They're really the three things you want to be covering in your documentation. And you may argue, well, actually nothing's ever gone wrong, and therefore things won't go wrong again in the future. But you just never know in this climate. One thing we have noticed is that the wedding industry has become far more litigious. What it means is, basically, couples aren't afraid to sue. They may have been pre-pandemic, but actually they're now more and more couples that are actually, you know, raising issues. We're in the information age. If something's not gone right, you go straight onto social media, and that has the potential to disrupt any business, really.
Oh, it does. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and you're social media, you know, expert, so you know firsthand what it's like to manage your reputation. So actually having certain clauses built into a contract to protect not only your reputation but protect you when things go wrong, I think it may be a good investment of time and money, just to speak to any lawyer to get some advice on it.
I was just going to say, kind of, I suppose your contract's there to protect you as a business as much as it is to protect your clients. Like I say, it sets out clearly who's doing what, when, so everybody's on the same page.
100%. That's so right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so have you got any kind of tips for those that maybe started their business and then changed their T's and C's as their business has grown and then the pandemic's hit? How often should you be looking at these kinds of things? And
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think every year at least, I recommend contracts being reviewed, because the law changes and also business practices change. The wedding landscape changes quite often. You might find new issues or new problems that you want to protect against within your contract. So at least once a year, just giving a bit of a spring clean to your documents, I think, is a really good idea. I mean, if you have just set out your business, or you've been around for a while and you want to know where to start in terms of maybe giving a bit of a spring clean to your agreements, I think the key clauses are checking what your deposit clauses are, checking your cancellation terms, and just being clear on what the obligations are on as you as a business as well as couples. I think those three things are where lots of things go wrong, and where we as lawyers see a lot of disputes. So I think if you could just examine those three clauses, make sure you understand them, try and make sure they're as fair as possible, I think you'll be on the right track if you can at least get that far for the moment.
Yeah, I know I'm going back a little bit to, you know, what we spoke about, understanding your contract, but if you don't understand them and your words that you've put in your contracts, and your client comes to you and questions said contract, how are you going to know how to respond if you don't understand the words that are in it?
Well, it happens a lot, actually. And the thing is, you know, let's face it, brides don't really want to go to a lawyer when they've got a big wedding to plan. That is the reality of it. We as lawyers only really get involved when things go wrong, when it comes to brides and grooms. What we try to do is avoid things going wrong by getting good contracts in place, because it's good for the business, it's good for the couple, and we try to make it as fair as possible, but, you know, protecting business interests, like you touched on earlier. So I think you're right. I think what we really want to do is we want to drive up the standards of the wedding industry. That's really what our mission is. It's at a high level, but it could be better. And we think one of the ways to do that is making sure that suppliers are as legally compliant as possible.
Yeah, and it shows kind of you as a business how reputable you are, doesn't it, as well? If the bride came to you, and in fact this happened to me and Katie, we were booking something for our WedCon, and they didn't have anything for us to sign, like a contract, anything, and that red flagged for us that, hold on a minute, how do we know how legitimate you are if there's no contract in place?
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. And actually, it's amazing how many suppliers still don't have any contracts in place. And they kind of just say, well, it's on an email, or, you know, we've discussed it. I mean, just to touch on it, you can have verbal agreements. Verbal contracts are a thing. It's just not a very good way to protect either party if you know, it became a game of he said, she said.
I was just going to say that's going to become one of those he said, she said things, and none of us have got time for that, guys. You all should have, let's face it, there all should be contracts within your wedding business. If you haven't got one, don't even listen to the rest of the podcast. Go and get one right now.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't want, you know, as a lawyer, we always try to be quite careful in not being scaremongering, because no one likes that. But having been in court quite a lot and litigated for both suppliers as well as couples, one thing we do notice is that judges are generally quite consumer friendly. That means that if you're a business, there is a greater standard of care that the courts do expect on you as a business.
Naturally, yeah.
Because whether it's true or not, they see businesses as the parties with the greater bargaining power and the pockets. That's not always the case, I must confess. And many of your businesses may actually find couples that have got lots and lots of money and they're a new business. But the courts are expecting businesses to kind of be on top of their legals. So I think, Roxy, I think that's some good advice. If you haven't got a contract, go and get one from whatever means you can, as long as they're relatively reputable.
Okay, so let's move on to the second contract that all wedding businesses have.
So this is an interesting one. Employment contracts or freelance contractor agreements are and I use those as one category of contract, because we found lots of photographers, makeup artists, they you know, they outsource a lot of their work. So actually, you know, one person can't do everything. So one thing we're noticing is that lots of photographers, videographers, DJs, particularly, they have all these other people helping them as of independent, self-employed contractors, but there's no agreement in place. And I think that's a real risk there, because one thing,
one of these grey areas.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason that's a risk is because actually we've had a case this week where it was actually a bridal artist, so someone who does makeup and hair, had a contractor working for them, and then went and set up their own business in the same area using a similar name, poaching the clients that they had been introduced to from the original company that they worked at. So
this is where your non-compete comes in, right?
Exactly, your non-compete, your confidentiality clauses. When you kind of outsource pieces of your work to other people, they will know a lot about your business. They'll know your client contacts, they'll know your pricing strategy. So it's not something everyone thinks about, but having that agreement in place really does protect your business. Particularly if you're a business that uses kind of contractors or outsources a fair amount. I really do recommend that you get a document in place just to protect yourself on that. And
That's
also,
a really great idea.
yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would think about, and this is dead boring, it's all about the tax implications. You know, if you're an employee of a company, usually the employer pays certain taxes. If you're a self-employed member of that company, then actually that self-employed person is responsible for their taxes. So having that clarity would really protect your business.
Yeah.
And I do really recommend it. It doesn't exist enough, quite frankly, in the wedding industry at the moment. It exists.
I'm just thinking, even for kind of insurance purposes. So let's just say I'm a photographer and I've got a second shooter and maybe even a videographer that's under my now umbrella for the day. But there's no contract in place. Kind of something goes wrong. I don't know what's going to happen, but the person that you've subcontracted to does something they shouldn't, or I don't know. Where does the blame lie with these kinds of things?
Well, that's the sort of thing you would cover. You know, you would ask your self-employed contractors or your second shooters, as it were, to have their own indemnity in place in case they trip someone up or, you know, they cause some sort of issue. And I think the other really big point that it protects is intellectual property. So this is very common in the photography world, where you get a second shooter that you've kind of just brought on, and that second shooter decides that they just want to exploit all the photos that they've taken. And actually, what you can do if you're a photographer is protect all those photos that your second shooter have taken, and it's owned by the company itself, so not owned by your second shooter. So it's little quirky things like that that can cause disputes, but can very quickly be resolved if you have a good contractor agreement in place. It's complicated, but that's the job of a legal team, to try and help you understand, you know, what the right obligations are. It happens a lot. Another example is where, you know, DJs who use like roadies, they call it, like people who help them de-rig, rig. They don't employ them. They just literally get other people to come late at night and take down and put up. But, you know, you're taking down big scaffolding or big, you know, rigs from the top of a kind of a party venue.
So risky thinking about it, but I know this does happen.
Yeah, it's so risky. And the question is, well, who's liable if someone gets injured? So it's quite an important area. And actually, believe it or not, a lot of disputes we're having at the moment are not between suppliers and couples, but suppliers and other suppliers, or other kind of freelancers. So I think do move with some speed if you are using freelancers, and get a freelance agreement in place.
I think a lot of people in the industry, a lot of businesses, they'll use people that they know and they're on like a good friendship relationship with them. Even then, guys, I would like, only because you know each other really well, get some sort of contracts in place just so you know where each other is. I've actually got a question, it's just popped in my head, a little bit off topic, the contracts. I have been asked this probably 4 or 5 times, probably in the last 12 months. What can suppliers do about copycats?
So when you say copycats, do you mean kind of companies that are copying what they're doing?
Yeah. So just how you said before about you've got someone to come and help you who's a makeup artist, and then that person goes and sets up on their own, uses your contacts, uses everything about your business, sometimes even name, social media stuff. What can we...
So the first thing I would say is, if you're a new business or an existing business, the first thing you want to be thinking about is setting up as many protective measures to protect your business, because that is your valuable entity. So the first thing is thinking about trademarking your name. If you think you've got a very unique name or something that, you know, is very well known in your local area or wherever you're based, get a trademark register done. It doesn't actually take that long, and it's not overly expensive.
Is it not? I think
you can get something done for about 300 odd quid, which seems like a lot now, but actually it's probably worth it if someone's
to protect. Yeah, definitely worth it.
So that's the first thing. So building protection number one, I think, is your branding and getting your trademark protection in place. And then the second thing is, I think you touched on it earlier, what we call very boringly restrictive covenants, or restrictions on what your workers or employees can do, either during their employment with you or after their employment or engagement with you. And having those set out very clearly would help protect, for example, you can control where geographically someone works after they've left your company for a certain period of time, or that they can't poach clients or they can't poach other workers that work within your company. So you can very easily create these barriers that protect your business. It's all about just doing it, because it's not hard to do and it can be done. It's just about taking that step and doing it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's a shame that I've actually been asked that many times.
Well, it's very common because whether anyone likes it or not, the wedding industry is very lucrative and competitive. And it's quite, certainly from my experience, it's all quite incestuous. So everyone kind of knows everyone and word can travel very quickly. So I think that's even more reason to build your protective kind of mechanisms up for your business as quickly as you possibly can.
Yeah, like you said, the trademark thing.
Mm.
And I think we as an industry probably thought that it was a lot more expensive than that, actually, but that's not so bad at all. So how do you go about kind of doing stuff like that? Do they just
well, you could do it yourself. You can actually Google apply for a trademark, and it's actually a very easy guide to doing it on the government website. There's nothing wrong in doing it yourself, and I think you can. There are certain risks because you want to make sure that you've got yourself protected in your various industry fields. So one option is doing it yourself, or you can instruct a lawyer to do it and help you with it. It's your choice. I don't want to be too salesy on this. I'm very happy to help, but anyone, and as long as they know what they're doing and they've got the experience, by all means, ask them to help you with it.
Oh, this is great advice. Like I said, so many questions are going to just keep pinging in my head because this is something that I've been wanting to cover for so long.
Yeah.
And on the question kind of thing, if any of the listeners do, if you guys have got any further questions on anything that we've covered so far or are going to cover in the rest of this podcast, just let us know. Get in touch, and we can put your questions over to Pran, and I'm sure he'll be happy to help.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk about contract number 3. Guys should be having.
So contract number 3 is a bit of an unusual one. It's having your terms of service and privacy statement on your website. So it's not actually something you give to anyone in person, but it's just making sure that your web presence is compliant with the data protection legislation. And it's often overlooked. If you use WordPress or if you use some of the kind of automated web application tools, you might have this already inbuilt. But I do recommend that everyone who's listening to this goes to their website, scrolls to the bottom, and just have a look at what the terms of service are, what your terms of service are.
The privacy policy and GDPR and things like that.
Yeah, so they should have a privacy policy, a cookies policy, and a terms of use policy. 3 policies. If you're missing one, you're probably falling short somewhere. And the reason that's quite important is because lots of websites capture personal data. You might have contact forms or booking forms. You might have an ability for people to leave posts, for example, or you might be sharing content to other websites. You just want to make sure that you are not falling foul anywhere. It's becoming a hot topic at the moment, particularly things like dealing with personal data. So I think do give that some thought. It is often overlooked, but it's amazing how many websites we look at that literally have no kind of terms or anything like that on there.
I mean, how long ago was it that kind of GDPR thing all like blew up and everyone was scared to death?
So I think it really came to light around, I think it was 2019, but there was murmur of it in 2018 as well. But it is, I think we're in the thick of the world of data protection, and you hear about these massive airlines that have these massive data breaches, and those are the issues that make the news. But actually, if you were a business and you're holding customer data, you've got to kind of make sure you've got to register yourself with the Information Commissioner's Office. You've got to make sure that you've got certain safeguards in place to look after that data. You may have names, addresses, date of births, maybe sometimes credit card details. So all very sensitive.
Yeah.
So it's often overlooked, but I can't stress how important it is just to kind of complete that step. Lots of people don't.
So we have registered with the ICO because that's something that we needed to do in our business. But it was kind of, we know a little bit more about biz. But for those of people who kind of are newer in business and fall under that bracket, let's go over that a little bit more, because I think that's a really important thing to do, and people might not be doing it.
Yeah. Well, the first thing, I mean, I will say this, I'm not a specialist data protection lawyer. There is a whole world of data protection law, but I kind of know it at a very kind of basic and kind of maybe intermediate level.
Yeah.
If you have a website, you're storing personal data, even if you haven't got a website, but some sort of booking form, it doesn't take long to register with the Information Commissioner's Office, but I would recommend you do that. Quite often, if you've got like a company's house account, or if you've got kind of a registrar that's helping you, they will give you the nudge to do that. You've got to pay a fee to register with them. And you've got to, I think that the best piece of advice I can give is, if you think there could be a data breach, or there has been a data breach, i.e. the leaking of personal information, you're best off having a good transparent chat with the Information Commissioner's Office, and actually having an open conversation about any risks that you think may exist. Before you have to get to that point, if you can, store things in the cloud, password protect, encrypt if you think you're holding really sensitive information, then they're all kind of real recommendations that we would ask suppliers to take based on the resources that you have.
So kind of on a final note, have you got any top tips that you'd like to give our listeners? Any important information that's like, okay, if you don't know this, you should definitely be doing this? Anything else?
I think what you touched on earlier is quite key. I think 3 things. Check you've got your terms and conditions in place. If you haven't, get some. 2, if you've got employees or freelancers, get something to protect your relationship with them. And just check your websites, and just check that you are compliant as possible. They are probably the 3 tips that I would, it's kind of what we've touched on today, but I guess that's to summarize the key 3 things, because it is where a lot of disputes arise from. So if you can be proactive and not wait for a dispute and get things in place, it's probably time and money well spent.
Definitely. Nobody wants to go down kind of the route of things going wrong legally. So put what you need to put in place in the beginning, just to protect yourself and to protect your clients as well.
Absolutely. Wants to go down. And I'm very happy to answer any questions on Instagram or whatever works. We want to try and make law a bit more interesting and exciting and not too intimidating, and that's really what we want to try and achieve. Because
sorry, I'm laughing because I don't know if you guys can hear that listening. My naughty puppy is dragging his food bowls around my laminate floor.
No. Hopefully I haven't got too much clearing up to do afterwards.
I'm a little bit scared to go into the other room.
Oh,
He's got a habit of tipping his water bowl right and I'm like, what? What I will do is put all your information, Pran, in the show notes. So if any of the lovely listeners want to find out more about you, they can do. What's your website? How can they get hold of you anyway?
Yeah, it's theweddinglawyer.co.uk. I'm on all the socials. Instagram's usually the most common in terms of dealing with inquiries, but I'm on Facebook as well. And yeah, just drop me a private message or whatever, and or via the website, the contact page, and I'll get back to you.
Great. It's been so lovely to have you on today. Thank you for answering all my kind of random questions.
No, they were great questions. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for all.
No problem. All right, we'll take care, guys, and we'll see you all on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.